Academic Listening Encounters, Life in Society. Listening, Note-Taking, and Discussion by Kim Sanabria. Series Editor Bernard Seal. Published by Cambridge University Press. These CDs contain the listening material for the Academic Listening Encounters, Life in Society Students Book. This recording is copyright. CD 2. Chapter 5, Mass Media Today. Page 67. Listening for specific information. Step 1. 1.
Some very alarming new statistics show that the number of teens who drink is on the increase.
2.
Elsie Smith was interviewed by reporters yesterday because it was her birthday. She was 105 years old.
3.
New research indicates that mammal cloning is becoming easier. Opposition to cloning continues, however.
4.
The world title in distance running is dominated by runners from a small handful of countries. This year, runners from Kenya and Ethiopia will compete for the title.
5.
Hundreds of people were injured as a major tornado ripped through the Midwest yesterday.
6.
A small town in upstate New York is welcoming immigrants from South America. The mayor says that they will be a big help in improving the economy.
7.
If you smoke, you may soon be paying more for your habit. The tax on cigarettes is due to rise again next month.
8.
There may be new hope for people suffering from certain types of skin cancer. A new drug that scientists have been developing has been approved for testing.
Now complete the steps in your book. Chapter 5, Mass Media Today. Page 69. Answering multiple choice questions. Step 2.
Hi, Carol. I'd like to get your opinion about news in the United States.
Well, I have very strong opinions about it. We think we're getting the news, but it's really just entertainment. It's based on what's going to keep people tuned in, like plastic surgery or celebrities. They actually tease you to get you to watch the news with those stories, because I think they think Americans get bored with international news.
You're talking about news on TV.
Yeah. They say, tune in at 11, find out how this woman lost weight. And that kind of keeps people watching, and that's what they call news. But what about major political problems? Those don't get reported in the way they should be. They don't get reported enough.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
The other thing that bothers me about the news is that it's shallow. Like, there are these people doing voiceovers, but the voiceovers have the same tone as people who do it for movies. It's like 6 guns to kill, and then it's like plastic surgery at 11. And it's the same voice, the same style for those two stories. It's equating those types of information. It's all like entertainment.
Do you think entertainment is more interesting than news?
Good question. I actually think we've gotten used to the idea that news should be just as entertaining as the movies, like a sitcom. And it should be quick and sort of like instant gratification.
What do you mean by instant gratification?
It's something that doesn't require you to think. Easy information. Something that makes you feel like you're learning something, but you really aren't. So it's quick and it's shallow. And the TV news has to be reported by news anchors who are physically attractive. If they're not attractive, viewers complain.
Well, Do you think newspapers give you better news coverage than TV?
I think newspapers are better because they're more in depth. But then who has time to really read them? And what's difficult about news in general is, see, I'm criticizing what's being reported, but the main problem is what's not being reported. And that's hard to criticize because you don't know what's not there. And I think papers are guilty of that.
Do you get any news from radio or the internet? Are they better? I mean, are there any good places to get news?
I do think there are better places, but you have to spend time finding them. And people need quick access. If you want to get specialized news, you have to go to special radio stations or websites. And I don't even know what those are.
So where do you get your news?
Mostly on TV. That's the thing. I realize I'm being sucked into it, so I'm critical of it, but it's okay because I know I'm being sucked in.
Now complete the steps in your book. Chapter 5, Mass Media Today. Page 70. Listening for specific information. Step 2.
Hi, Sherry. I'd like to get your opinion about the news.
Okay. Well, I get most of my news on the internet, but I read papers too.
And what do you think about the news in the newspaper?
What I notice about the papers is that the news is really depressing, especially the main stories. You have bombings and accidents and people killing people. I find more and more that the news in the United States is getting focused on negative things. It's always a disaster of some sort.
So you think it's very negative?
Yeah, and there's something else. I like to read about international news, but it seems that people here aren't really that interested in it. I read somewhere, I can't remember, that it's a prestige thing to cover the international news.
And you don't think people in the United States like international news?
No, I don't. But because I've lived in so many countries around the world, I am interested in international news. The news in Korea is from everywhere. The United States, Europe, Japan, China. Anyway, what I like about newspapers are the arts and culture sections, and the human interest stories, which can be really uplifting. I like to read about people. For example, there was a story about some crime in the park, but now they're examining that case again, and it turns out that the 5 young people who they thought did it might be innocent, actually. It was shocking that the judicial system had failed in the beginning, but I'm glad they finally found out that those young people were innocent.
So you liked that story?
Yeah. I mean, that kind of news, people could actually read it and feel positive, like you could really improve the system or whatever. Compared to news that's depressing and you feel helpless, you can't do anything about it.
Frank, what do you think about the news?
Well, I don't know about the news, but I like the newspaper. I get one every day. I walk over to the store and I buy the paper. I go home, I sit down in my chair, and I really enjoy reading it.
What do you read?
Well, first I look at the front page, and then I turn to the sports section to find out how my teams are doing. I read all the articles about them. Usually I've seen those games anyway, so I like to compare what the writer says with what I think. And then I read the main stories, especially the scandals. But what I really enjoy are the crossword puzzles. I'll sit for hours trying to figure some of them out. I have this electronic dictionary I sometimes use for the clues.
And what do you do if you can't get a word?
Well, then I'll take a break. I usually get everything eventually. You learn to see how these people think. It's the same with journalists. You get to know what their opinions and reactions are going to be.
You mean in the regular news?
Yeah. You see, I do read the articles about what the government's doing and what's happening. But what you have to realize is that reporters are just people like you. They have their own opinions about what's going on. So you have to take what they say with a grain of salt. It's a lot of half-truths they write to make you think what they want you to think about. You can get the basic information, but you have to use your own ideas to analyze the news. A lot of the times it's really biased.
Now complete the steps in your book. Chapter 5, Mass Media Today. Page 76. Note-taking. Listening for signal words. Step 2. 1.
Nowadays, more than ever before, we are surrounded by news.
2.
In fact, so many news stories appear every day that it's impossible to keep up with them.
3.
First of all, there are different kinds of journalists.
4.
Sometimes journalists are called reporters because they report the news.
5.
Usually, unplanned events are more exciting.
6.
However, it's important not to report too much personal information or anything that is scandalous.
Now complete the steps in your book. Chapter 5, Mass Media Today. Page 77. Note-taking. Choosing a format for organizing your notes. Step 2.
Nowadays, more than ever before, we are surrounded by news. You can get the news on radio, on television, in newspapers, and on the internet. In fact, so many news stories appear every day that it's impossible to keep up with them. And behind all of these stories, there's a journalist. First of all, there are different kinds of journalists, like entertainment journalists, sports journalists, and crime journalists. And they all work hard to deliver the news 24 hours a day. So how exactly do they find and write stories? Let's look at the work of one type of journalist, a city reporter. Sometimes journalists are called reporters because they report the news. So a city reporter is a person assigned to find and write stories about local news. How does the reporter do her work? Well, to begin with, she should keep in contact with lots of different organizations: the local police and fire departments, the offices of local politicians, and religious and civic organizations in the neighborhood. Once the reporter has a good relationship with these organizations, she can call them to see what's happening, or they might call her to tell her about something that's going on. There are two kinds of stories she could write about. The first is a planned event for which the reporter can anticipate many of the details. For example, a politician could be opening a new department store. The second is an unplanned event. For example, a fire or a crime. Usually, unplanned events are more exciting. Let's look at one kind of unplanned event, a crime. Imagine that a fight breaks out between 4 men in a neighborhood bar, and one of the men threatens another with a knife. The reporter will probably see a few lines about the crime in the police log. Once she knows where it happened, she can go to the scene of the crime and interview people. The first person she will want to interview is a police officer, so that she can get the facts. There are 4 very important facts that every reader wants to know at the beginning of every story. 1. What happened? 2. When did it happen? 3. Where did it happen? And 4. Who was involved? Once the reporter has the basic facts of the story, she can begin to interview witnesses. When you're interviewing witnesses, it's very important to get each witness's full name and some other details, perhaps the person's job or age. These details will make the story more interesting and credible. However, it's important not to report too much personal information or anything that is scandalous. When the reporter has finished interviewing people, she'll go back to the newsroom to write the story. At that point, she might talk to her editor to decide whether she has a good story. Together, the reporter and editor must decide whether the reporter has enough facts and material to make a good story. Is it clear what happened and why?
Now complete the steps in your book. Chapter 5, Mass Media Today. Page 80. Note-taking. Choosing a format for organizing your notes. Step 1.
The single most important question of all is whether or not the story is accurate. If a newspaper publishes a story that isn't supported by facts and somebody finds a mistake, then the newspaper's reputation will be damaged for a long time. For example, if the paper publishes a story saying that Bill Jones started the fight, and later it turns out that Fred Porter started the fight, there would be a problem. First of all, the public would have been misinformed, and people might decide not to buy that paper in the future. Secondly, Bill Jones could decide to sue the paper for misrepresenting his character. That's called libel, and it's something judges take very seriously. That's why many newspapers insist on having every controversial fact in a story supported by two different sources. If two people who don't know each other both tell the reporter that Bill Jones started the fight, then the newspaper feels it can publish the story. But checking every fact with two different sources takes a long time, and there isn't much time in the news world. Yesterday's news isn't worth much to the public, and every newspaper wants to be the first to publish a story. A reporter who has a big story will always want to publish it as soon as possible. So it's the editor's job to check that the reporter has done her work thoroughly and that there are no uncorroborated facts. But let's suppose the reporter has done her job well. She's checked all the facts, and she knows she's got interesting interviews. Now she just has to write the story. Easy, right? Well, not always. Remember how quickly most people read newspapers. A journalist must know how to organize a difficult story and present it very clearly, in language that's simple but very effective. When the story is written, it goes into the computer. Somebody checks that the story is grammatically accurate, and somebody else checks it for typing mistakes. Then a photograph is chosen to go with the story, and the editor-in-chief decides what page of the newspaper to put the story on. And what makes a good story? Well, there are three main things. First of all, the story has to be new. If it happened 3 months ago, it isn't news. Second, it has to be unusual. There's an old saying in the newsroom, if a dog bites a man, it isn't news. But if a man bites a dog, that's news. Third, it has to be something interesting that your readers want to know about. After all, if they don't want to know about it, they won't buy your newspaper.
Now complete the steps in your book. Chapter 6, The Influence of the Media. Page 83. Recording numerical information. Step 2.
The first area includes the United States, Canada, Europe, Australia, and Japan. In these countries, there are 40 or more TVs per 100 people. Area 2 includes Brazil, Russia, South Korea, and the People's Republic of China. In this area, there are between 20 and 40 TVs per 100 people. The next area includes Mexico, Central America, and part of South America. Part of Africa and most of the Middle East are also in Area 3. This area, which includes many countries in the developing world, has between 8 and 20 TVs per 100 people. Finally, we come to Area 4, most of Africa and all of India. Here, there are fewer than 8 TVs per 100 people.
Now complete the steps in your book. Chapter 6. The Influence of the Media. Page 85. Listening for specific information. Step 1. 1. Eddie.
Hi, Eddie. Tell me how often you play video games.
I don't know, maybe a couple of hours a week. In the summertime it's more, maybe 5-6 hours a week.
2. Leslie.
Well, I guess I have mixed feelings about cell phones. They used to bother me a lot, but now I have one.
3. Ralph.
I really like watching action movies, kung fu movies, adventure, stuff like that.
Now complete the steps in your book. Chapter 6. The Influence of the Media. Page 85. Listening for specific information. Step 2.
Hi, Eddie. Tell me how often you play video games.
I don't know, maybe a couple of hours a week. In the summertime it's more, maybe 5-6 hours a week.
Don't you think there's a lot of violence in video games?
Yeah, well, I try not to play those games. I only like sports games. I hate those gun ones where you just walk around and kill people.
Why? Do you think they have a bad effect on you?
I don't think a bad effect, maybe a wasteful effect. I feel like when I play, I'm wasting the day away. I think video games restrict the things kids do, like read. Kids can become addicted to them. They just sit and do video games all day.
So you think they do have a bad effect?
I don't know. A bad effect? Not for teenagers, I don't think. Maybe they could be dangerous for little kids because they haven't been alive for that long and their minds aren't fully developed.
And what about big kids? Do big kids know the difference between fantasy and reality?
Yeah, definitely.
But what about all the violence?
Well, most kids like the feeling of killing things in video games. But it's part of the game. It's not real. Video games can be very entertaining, but it's not good if you overuse them. The reason isn't because they'll make you deranged, just that they make you waste time. I don't play any violent games myself, but I know a lot of people who do, and they don't really have a negative effect. They just make the kid a little bit more antisocial. They don't make people want to kill each other.
Leslie, can you tell me if there's any form of media that has a particular influence on you?
Well, I guess I have mixed feelings about cell phones. They used to bother me a lot, but now I have one.
Why didn't you like them?
I used to think they were just trendy, a status symbol thing, and too expensive. But I think there are other dangers with cell phones.
Like what?
Like driving while talking on the cell phone. When I was coming home from college for Thanksgiving break, the bus driver was talking on his cell phone the whole way, and it really upset me. Here he was. The weather was really bad, and he was just talking on the phone. And I was really scared, like I didn't think I was going to get home.
Wow, that does sound dangerous.
Yeah, but I think there are benefits too. I finally bought one because I need people to get in touch with me about school or about work. And for my mom, she works a lot. She's away from home a lot, so It's great for her to have a cell phone to call us at home, to keep tabs on us, and, we can call her too.
Ralph, you watch a lot of movies, right?
Yeah, I really like watching action movies. Kung fu movies, adventure, stuff like that. They're interesting.
Do you watch them with your family?
Yeah, but you gotta keep an eye on the movies. If they're too bad, I won't let my girls watch. I say, hey, let's go to the park or something.
Why? Are you worried about them getting bad messages?
Oh yeah, you gotta check out the program. See, the movies they have on now, they're not the same as they used to have years ago, They've gotten a lot more violent. And all of those special graphics make them look more real too. And then there's the sex. A lot of movies are full of sex. So the parents, they need to check out the movies that the kids are watching. Except the movies with the heroes, now they're all right. Where they catch the bad guy, those movies are good for them.
Do you think kids copy the actions of the heroes?
Not really. But at least those movies don't have much sex. See, the young kids can't really understand that TV is only imaginary. They think it's real.
Now complete the steps in your book. Chapter 6. The Influence of the Media. Page 87. Listening for specific information. Step 1. 1. Vanessa.
Let's see. Well, personally, I'm really shocked to watch the regular TV news because it's paid for by these big corporations and is completely drained of all real information.
Two. Felix.
Felix, how much TV do you watch a day?
Oh, I can't say. But the older you get, the more you get into it. It's very entertaining.
3. Richard.
Well, I do have a confession to make. The only modern form of media I really like is the jet plane. I mean, I know it's not the media, but I really consider it to be a form of communication.
Now complete the steps in your book. Chapter 6. The Influence of the Media. Page 87. Listening for specific information. Step 2.
Vanessa, what kind of influence do you think the media has on us?
Let's see. Well, personally, I'm really shocked to watch the regular TV news because it's paid for by these big corporations and is completely drained of all real information. The TV news is totally biased and only shows certain things. You can't get a clear picture of what's really going on.
And who's responsible for that?
The corporate and political interests. The news is totally manipulated. They're not going to tell us anything that isn't prepackaged. It's infotainment. Isn't that what they call it now?
Infotainment?
Yeah. It's a combination of the words information and entertainment. I mean, during a war now, you see these huge maps and the planes that go zooming around. They treat war like a video game.
And Felix, how much TV do you watch a day?
Oh, I can't say. But the older you get, the more you get into it. It's very entertaining. I usually watch good movies, sometimes a sitcom, but a lot of sports. I'm really into sports, particularly women's sports. I think this is the time of women in sports. Sports give you a lot of character.
Do you think television has a positive effect on people?
Well, it depends. There are a lot of educational programs that help kids. You know, nature programs.
Anything else?
I also like a good whodunit. I like cartoons, too. You have to look for what is positive. But parents are the nucleus of the family, so they have to pay attention to what their kids are watching, especially when the kids are in their formative years.
Richard, I know you have strong feelings about the media.
I do. I've never had a television in my life. I grew up before television was really common, and I just don't have time for it. I think you have to look at the trade-off for whatever you do.
What do you mean by trade-off?
What it costs, not only in money, but in terms of what it does to your life. I have no real machines in my apartment. Well, I do have an FM radio.
Yeah, what do you listen to?
Well, weather reports, good music, and I have a telephone now, but I lived for 8 years without one.
8 years without a telephone?
Well, I discovered there were telephones on every street corner, and I really didn't need one for anything.
Do you have a computer?
I do not own a computer, because when I go on the internet, I'm always disappointed. You see, I think modern technology destroys all the beauty and meaning in life. The machine gets in the way, and I don't want to be part of a machine. That's not the way I want to live my life.
Aren't there any good things that the modern media bring us? I don't know, closer contact with other people?
Well, I do have a confession to make. The only modern form of media I really like is the jet plane. I mean, I know it's not the media, but I really consider it to be a form of communication. It has allowed me to travel all over the world. I get great enjoyment out of traveling. I link up with people from foreign countries. I meet them. I talk to them. And so in that way, the jet plane has improved international communication, much more than fax or email will ever do.
What an interesting idea. Thank you, Richard.
Now complete the steps in your book. Chapter 6. The Influence of the Media. Page 92. Note-taking. Organizing your notes as a map. Step 2.
15 years ago, if you heard the words mass media, you probably immediately thought of television, newspapers, magazines, and the radio. But today, if you made a list of the mass media you use, you would have to add newer technologies such as cable, satellite TV, PDAs or personal digital assistants, and the internet. And of course, technology has brought us some wonderful things, and I personally wouldn't want to live without it. But all these new advances bring us dangers that we should be aware of. There's a lot of violence in TV shows, and many people worry about its effect on us. In addition to making us violent, TV can also make us passive. Third, using the media can become very addictive.
Now complete the steps in your book. Chapter 6. The Influence of the Media. Page 93. Note-taking. Organizing your notes as a map. Step 2.
15 years ago, if you heard the words mass media, you probably immediately thought of television, newspapers, magazines, and the radio. But today, if you made a list of the mass media you use, you would have to add newer technologies such as cable, satellite TV, PDAs or personal digital assistants, and the internet. In today's world, we are surrounded by technology that allows us to communicate with others. And of course, technology has brought us some wonderful things, and I personally wouldn't want to live without it. But all these new advances bring us dangers that we should be aware of. Let's begin by discussing 3 of these dangers: violence, passivity, and addiction. There's a lot of violence in TV shows, and many people worry about its effect on us. For example, almost every home in the United States has a color television. And according to a recent study, TV is on in the average household for 7 hours and 37 minutes every day. And many people are afraid that children and adolescents are especially susceptible to this violence. In 1993, for example, a young boy jumped out of a window after seeing a superhero do the same thing on TV while he was chasing an enemy. And what about the movie where kids set a subway booth on fire? Some teenagers saw that movie and then they did the same thing. Tragically, the man working at the booth died as a result of the fire. In addition to making us violent, TV can also make us passive. You've probably heard the term couch potato. It refers to a person who daydreams for hours in front of the TV. When we are in this passive state, we may not be able to distinguish between fantasy and reality, and we may make bad decisions about important things in our lives. Third, using the media can become very addictive. For example, how many internet users can say that they quickly go online, find what they need, and get off again? That's just not the case for most of us, who wander through cyberspace, clicking here and there, and wasting a lot of time in the process. If you check your email more than 3 or 4 times a day, you might want to ask yourself if you really need all that communication. And cell phones, which these days can also be used to go online, are highly addictive as well.
Now complete the steps in your book. Chapter 6. The Influence of the Media. Page 95. Note-taking. Organizing your notes as a map. Step 2.
The fourth danger we should be concerned about is the increase in advertising. You see, the media is not only interested in providing information or entertainment, but also selling space or time to advertisers. You used to be able to enjoy a TV show or relax and read a magazine, and there wasn't too much advertising. Now, however, it seems that advertising is the main goal. The content of a TV program or a magazine is just an excuse or a kind of wrapping for the advertising. There is an essential marketing relationship between the media, the advertiser, and the user, and it exists whatever the media. Even print media, which is one of the least technological forms of communication, has a high percentage of ads. On TV, of course, we're used to being bombarded by endless commercials every 8 minutes. Many of us use our remote control to zap out the advertising with the mute button, or simply channel surf to find someplace we can escape from the ads. But the advertisers have found many ways to get their message across to you anyway. They use what is called product placement, which means that they put products right in the middle of a show. For example, the hero of the show might be drinking a particular soft drink like Coca-Cola or Dr. Pepper. Or he might be wearing a pair of shoes with the name Nike or Adidas. You can't escape from this form of advertising unless you just turn off your set. The problem is not just that we are being bombarded by advertising, but that the media is invading our privacy. Advertisers are more and more interested in getting private information about individuals. Every time you use your credit card, you're giving away information about yourself. Advertisers have the ability to gather statistical data about people like you, potential consumers. Think about this for a moment. Have you ever gotten junk mail from a company you never heard of? Where did they get your address? Have you ever gotten a phone call during dinner from some company trying to sell you something? Where did they get your telephone number? Well, information about you can be compiled and sold to other companies. And advertisers can study what you buy, where you buy it, and how much of it you buy, and figure out the best way to make you buy more. On the internet, many websites are working extra hard to collect information about you. You can be tracked if you make a few visits to any website, and the data can be used to learn more about your habits, interests, and other behavior. We are surrounded everywhere by a message that tells us that we can be better, more successful, more popular, and altogether happier if we just have more. I believe we need to step back once in a while and ask ourselves if this message is true. Is it true? Are we what we buy? What if we couldn't buy anything, ever? Who would we be?
Now complete the steps in your book. Chapter 7, Crime and Criminals. Page 100. Building background knowledge on the topic. Technical terms. Step 1. 1.
A gold watch and a necklace were stolen from a home on Woodfield Avenue. The criminals entered the house through a bathroom window.
2.
A man was arrested at midnight on Harper Street because he was carrying a handgun without a license. He was taken to the police station for questioning.
3.
There's breaking news in the sexual assault case that we reported last week. Police have charged a man in connection with 2 similar cases that took place in the same neighborhood.
4.
A woman in her late 30s was found taking items from the local pharmacy. She was caught on camera as she was putting the items in her pocket.
5.
2 teenage boys were arrested for setting their school on fire. They entered the school after classes were over and set fire to the teacher's lounge. Luckily, no one was hurt.
6.
A car that was stolen from a supermarket parking lot was found near an old house by the railroad tracks. No one has been arrested yet in connection with the crime.
7.
A jealous ex-boyfriend has been charged in the killing of 2 young people in their 20s. The couple had been planning to get married.
Now complete the steps in your book. Chapter 7, Crime and Criminals. Page 102. Answering true-false questions. Step 2.
I'd like to ask both of you, now that you have a young child, whether you worry about the level of crime in the city.
Luckily, I've never actually been struck by crime. But now that we have Daniel, I've become more conscious of it.
What do you mean?
Well, personally, it doesn't affect me that much. But I hear so many stories, and I see it on the TV news, so I'm aware of it and concerned about it. Sometimes I'm out late at night, and I see big groups of kids roaming the streets, and that frightens me.
And you, Arpad?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. If it's a rowdy teenage group, I go over to the other side of the street. I'm tall, but still I try to avoid them.
And what I think is that they should be doing something else.
Do you worry that violence could affect your life?
I do, to be honest. Every time I get on the subway, I'm afraid that someone in the car could have a gun. Guns might not be visible, but they're everywhere, and at any minute, people can lose control. Guns are my biggest fear. I think guns are the biggest problem in the city.
And you, Arpad?
Well, I've never seen anyone with a gun, and much less seen a shooting. But just last week, someone got shot in a bookstore, in the safest part of the city. It's very random, that's what worries me. There was another incident where a kid was asleep, and there was a shot from the apartment next door that went through the wall, and the bullet struck him in the leg. You're not even safe in your own house.
Why do you think there is so much crime?
Because kids think guns are ordinary. They're available. They're just facts of life. It's a recipe for disaster.
I think that kids don't have enough contact with their parents. Basically, kids who get into gangs don't have that much contact with other people. You know what I'm trying to say?
I agree with Evelina. Parents are the main people that need to be responsible for their children. My sister's a teacher, and she says it's amazing. Some parents think that school is responsible for teaching kids values, but that's not what I think.
So many problems come from the fact that parents can't spend enough time with their kids.
And gun control should be the government's responsibility. If there were fewer guns, that would definitely bring crime down.
Yeah, the government has such a slack attitude toward guns. I really agree with Arpad.
Now complete the steps in your book. Chapter 7. Crime and Criminals. Page 103. Retelling what you have heard. Step 2.
Gail, I know you've been the victim of a crime.
Unfortunately, yes. Once I was mugged by some young kids.
What happened?
I was going home late at night, and I couldn't see a single person on the street. And it was winter. Oh, it was so cold. So I had my scarf wrapped around my face, and then, suddenly, I walked straight into these 3 guys. They looked about 14 or 15, and they said something threatening like, "Give us all your money, we're gonna kill you." And I'm looking at them because they look so young, and I'm thinking, what on earth are you doing? They said, blah, 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 and I said, "Listen, it's very cold. Give me a second, I have to take off my gloves."
You must have been really scared.
Well, I opened my purse, and all I've got is a few dollars. I was so nervous. And I say, "Here it is." And they say, $4? Yeah, it's $4. And they say, "That's all you have?"
So then what happened?
Well, I gave them the money, and I just went home. But I felt so bad. You know, I really had mixed feelings about it. I wanted to say, "Guys, what are you doing? You know, go home. You're ruining your lives." And I think, why are those kids on the street doing things they're not supposed to? Something stupid, really stupid, that could lead to something worse.
Why do you think kids get involved in stealing?
I don't know. I mean, it was only $4. You look at kids getting involved in this kind of small crime and you think, who's responsible? I don't know what they were doing out on the street at that time of night.
Did you report the crime?
No, I didn't. Kids like that don't need prosecuting. They need parenting. They need someone to put them on the right path. These kids really need, you know, help.
In what way?
Well, kids are so vulnerable. They have to get a lot of supervision. There are these kids hanging out on the street, doing things they're not supposed to. It's almost a macho type of thing. But I think if these kids had more self-esteem, they wouldn't behave in that way. We have to find ways to help these kinds of kids have good futures. Then they wouldn't commit crimes.
What about you, Tom? What was your experience?
Well, actually, I was robbed several times. The worst time was when my apartment was burglarized. I got home and saw the lock on my door had been broken and the apartment was ransacked.
What was taken?
They took my camera, my stereo, my paperwork. I lost irreplaceable personal items.
Were you scared?
No, I was angry. And I felt helpless because I knew I could never find out what really happened. And I knew I'd never get my stuff back. It's like a feeling of violation when you know that someone has broken into your private space and taken your things. I called the police so that I could have a record of what was stolen for tax purposes, but they never caught the thief.
And that wasn't the first time you were robbed?
No, I've had things taken by pickpockets. Once someone took my wallet on the subway. and there was a letter from my girlfriend in it that I like to carry around with me. Not really important, I suppose, but it had symbolic value, and when something like that happens, you lose a part of your past. That time I felt angry at myself because they always tell you not to put your wallet in your back pocket.
Now complete the steps in your book. Chapter 7, Crime and Criminals. Page 108. Note-taking. Clarifying your notes. Step 2.
Crime can be divided into two main categories: misdemeanors and felonies. A misdemeanor is broadly defined as a crime that is punishable with more than 15 days in prison but less than 1 year. A felony carries a term of imprisonment of more than 1 year. When a person who commits a misdemeanor or a felony is caught, that person, who is called a defendant or the accused, goes through a legal process that ends with a judge or a jury finding him either guilty or innocent. If the person is found guilty, then the judge decides what the punishment should be.
Now complete the steps in your book. Now complete the steps in your book. Chapter 7, Crime and Criminals. Page 109. Note-taking. Clarifying your notes. Step 1.
Crime can be divided into two main categories: misdemeanors and felonies. A misdemeanor is broadly defined as a crime that is punishable with more than 15 days in prison but less than 1 year. A felony carries a term of imprisonment of more than 1 year. When a person who commits a misdemeanor or a felony is caught, that person, who is called a defendant or the accused, goes through a legal process that ends with a judge or a jury finding him either guilty or innocent. If the person is found guilty, then the judge decides what the punishment should be. Let me begin by talking about types of felonies. Some of the more serious felonies include burglary, robbery, arson, kidnapping, rape, and murder. These crimes are so serious that anyone found guilty will spend some time in prison. A misdemeanor, on the other hand, could be pickpocketing, fare evasion, or something of that nature. But sometimes a crime that is a misdemeanor in one part of the country might be a felony in another part of the country. Another way in which people may classify a crime is by using the terms white-collar crime or blue-collar crime. White-collar crime refers to crime committed by salaried employees in businesses and corporations. It includes tax fraud and embezzlement, and it can involve large sums of money and affect millions of people. One of the main types of white-collar crime is corporate crime. Corporate crime is committed by people of high social status who work in corporations. Corporate crime is very difficult to prosecute for two main reasons. First, because it's difficult to prove who's responsible, and second, because the criminals are usually wealthy and powerful. An example of corporate crime that was successfully prosecuted concerns the tobacco industry in the United States. The tobacco industry was found guilty of causing the deaths of thousands of people who smoke cigarettes. As punishment, tobacco companies have had to pay millions of dollars to the victims' families. The crimes you're more likely to hear about are blue-collar crimes such as burglary, car theft, pickpocketing, and so on. Perhaps we hear more about these crimes because they happen more often. However, white-collar crime can have a greater impact on our society. Crime has always existed in society, but today there are new kinds of crimes. One example is the use of computers to steal identities. As more people have access to computers, the more likely it is for your identity to be stolen. If this happens, criminals may open several credit card accounts and bank accounts in your name. And, of course, they won't pay the bill, which means that your credit will be ruined, and that's very difficult to correct.
Chapter 7, Crime and Criminals. Page 111. Note-taking. Using your notes to answer test questions. Step 2.
As long as there has been crime, there have been ways to solve it. One of the oldest methods is interrogation, a method in which the police question people who might have committed the crime or who might have information about the crime. Interrogation can help the police to establish many basic facts. But modern techniques for solving crime include more complex scientific methods. Let me first talk about a system often called crime hotlines. In some cases where law enforcement personnel have difficulty finding a criminal, they turn to private citizens for help in solving a crime. This system allows people to make a phone call or access a website and give information to the police anonymously. This can often be effective when people are afraid to give information in public. Sometimes a family member may have committed the crime, and another family member finally decides to call the police and give the information they have. Second, fingerprinting. Each person's fingerprint is unique. The ancient Chinese used fingerprints to sign legal papers. What better way to identify an individual? Yet it was only in the late 19th century that fingerprints were first used to identify criminals. A variety of scientific techniques make it possible for fingerprints to be lifted from most surfaces. Then they can be compared to fingerprints the police have on file. A relatively new technique that crime fighters are now using is called psychological profiling. Criminal psychologists look at the crime and the way it was committed. Based on this information, they try to understand the personality and motivation of the person who committed the crime. Then, they can focus their search on people who match this profile. In some cases, private citizens are finding ways to solve crimes as well. With a little knowledge of electronics, anyone can put hidden cameras in a home or office. In the 1990s, as an example, there were some cases where nannies were accused of abusing the children they were paid to care for. Hidden cameras were used to prove the nanny's guilt. However, the technique is controversial because it involves issues of privacy. Finally, let me discuss DNA. Of the most recent crime-solving techniques used, DNA is proving very effective. Each person, with the exception of identical siblings, has a unique DNA coding system. So, if criminals leave anything that can be tested at the scene of the crime, such as blood or hair, they can be identified. DNA was used to solve a crime for the first time in England in 1987. Since that time, it has become widely used and is considered 99% accurate. DNA testing can also be used to prove that a person is innocent. Many prisoners have been released because the DNA evidence proves that they did not commit the crime of which they were convicted.
Now complete the steps in your book. The program continues on the next CD.